What will be the central task of the Communist Party of China, the ruling party of China, in the next 5 years and beyond? And what will that mean to you? On Sunday, Chinese President Xi Jinping, who is also General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, gave the answers on behalf of the party leadership during a report to the opening session of the 20th CPC National Congress. Simply put, the party is to lead the Chinese people in a concerted effort to build China into a great modern socialist country in all respects through a Chinese path of modernization. What exactly does this mean? What new concepts or ideas have been put forward in the report, and what does it entail for the rest of the world? I'm pleased to be joined from Beijing by Xia Lu, Associate Professor of the School of Marxism Studies at Renmin University of China. He's also a Research Fellow of the National Academy of Development and Strategies. I'm also pleased to be joined from Beijing by David Ferguson, Honorary Chief English Editor of Foreign Languages Press here in the Chinese capital. Gentlemen, welcome to the special edition of The Point. Professor Xia, let me go to you first. Help people understand, first of all, how is such a report prepared and drafted? I mean, in the process of the report, what kind of input will be pulled to make sure that it reflects the will of the people, it set out a realistic, a correct path forward for the party and for the country?
Yes, thank you very much for having me here first. And I also am pleased to join this discussion. Well, let me put in this way. So the major report delivered by President Xi Jinping to the 20th National Congress actually has been in the process of preparation actually for more than 1 year. Actually, by the end of the sixth plenum of the Central Committee last year, the preparation of the major report has just begun. And in process, this report should be prepared for different, let's say, phases. And first of all, it should, kind of combine all the previous decades' work and achievement in the report, and it also should mention the reason or the background or the causes to the achievement. And then it should set down, or it should set out the outlines for the next 5 years or even next decades or even next couple of decades, kind of the major tasks or the major, let's say, challenges and opportunity. And also one of the great components of the report is to stimulate, to give people spirit, to give people confidence, and to give people, let's say, the deep code for the future success or the future, let's say, task.
I was actually quite surprised to find out, for instance, some specific numbers. Sunday morning, when delegates were being interviewed on their way to the meeting, for instance, one figure is that 4,700 people, their opinions were collected on the drafting of this report. So, David, what is your understanding of why this report is so important, is so significant, and why such a wide range of people will be consulted so that this report will be the right one for the country to stick to?
Hi, Lucy. It's a real pleasure to be with you again. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, I think the Congress report is one of the most important political documents in China's political process and structure. It's every 5 years. It's a comprehensive report on the work of the previous 5 years or even the previous decade. And it looks forward another 5 years, another 10 years, even as far as the second centenary go, which means 2049. It's the president's opportunity to talk to the country, to unite the country. And I think it's a very good example of whole process democracy. The number of people who are actually consulted, the number of people who actually contribute, is a sign of how China's system works. And fundamentally, China's system is about consultation, it's about cooperation, and it's about consensus. And the report is a good concrete example of what that looks like in practice.
Professor Xia, as I mentioned in the beginning, in the leading, President Xi elaborated on the central task of the Communist Party of China for the next 5 years and beyond. He said from this day forward, the central task of the CPC will be to lead the Chinese people of all ethnic groups in a concerted effort to realize the second centenary goal of building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects and to advance the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts through a Chinese path of modernization. This is carefully crafted sentence, word by word, to make sure that it expresses all the important messages here. Help us understand exactly what that means, that the Communist Party of China will lead the Chinese people to do in the next 5 years and beyond.
In the very beginning of the report, there is a theme, the main theme of this report. Actually, we should combine the main theme and the main mission together for better our understanding about the general report's kind of their contribution. So in my opinion, not only the theme, but also the mission actually could be understood from the following four aspects, from the four parts. The first one is the banner, the so-called banner. The banner is the socialism of China's characteristics. And the second is the path. The path is Chinese revolution, Chinese modernization, the Chinese version of modernization. The third is the mindset. So what kind of mindset should the Chinese people, should the entire Chinese nation have in the pursuit of the goal? And then the fourth one is the goal, is the greater goal. And that goal is the rejuvenation of the entire Chinese nation. So we can say that in the main theme, there are the four parts, and the mission is the, in detail, or it is the kind of elaboration in terms of detail of the four parts.
Yeah, is this paraphrasing, is this sentence a continuation, a development of the central task of the party that was stipulated during the last party congress?
Well, actually, it is in the very beginning. It should be the second or third paragraph, and talking about the main theme. And the main theme is to hold the banner, and what kind of mindset, and what kind of the path, and what kind of the goal. So basically, this remind us the speech that President Xi Jinping delivered in the late July. You still remember that seminar participated by the provincial and the ministerial level cadres in July 26th, and that was a very significant seminar and meeting participated by high-level cadres before the 20th National Congress of the party. And actually, in that speech, President Xi Jinping actually has already mentioned the main points, or the sketch out the main points, outline of this kind of the major report, the major report to the Congress. And we can just see the continuity of this report, and from that speech to this report.
But it seems that the idea of the Chinese path to modernization is a rather striking feature of this report. A lot of people highlighted this aspect. For instance, President Xi underscored the unique features of Chinese path of modernization, saying that it contains, of course, the elements that are common to modernization of other countries, but is also more characterized by features that are unique to Chinese content. And he also specifically described what kind of modernization the Chinese modernization is looking like. Mr. Xia, why is he emphasizing on the Chinese path of modernization? Why this matters?
In the very beginning of Chinese opening and reform in 1979, when Mr. Deng Xiaoping met the foreign friends, he actually mentioned the Chinese version of modernization for the first time. But at that time, he mentioned in very detail. For example, he mentioned the modernization in culture, in industry, heavy industry, the modernization in agriculture, the modernization in military industry, and also the modernization in scientific and technology.
Of course, we all remember the 四个现代化.
Yeah, of course. But that was the first time Chinese leaders mentioned the Chinese version of modernization. But back then, the modernization was in detail, was kind of tangible, and was more about China's own business. However, well, when President Xi Jinping first put out or put down the Chinese version of modernization, actually it was in 2020, okay, in the report or in the kind of resolution to the fifth plenum of the 19th Central Committee. Back then, almost 2 years ago, he has already put down the Chinese version of modernization, and the five characteristics of Chinese version of modernization is not only about a detail, it's not only about the industry, agriculture, scientific and technology. It's more about the comparison, or it is more about the path or the approach of the human beings modernization. So there should be only one version of modernization which is settled down, or which has been set by the example of Western countries, of the developed countries. But there should be diverse version of the modernization. Yes, the final goal is modernization.
Okay. David, David, let me get your take there. We're getting a little bit of abstract discussions, but these are very important, especially at this very important juncture. How do you look at the emphasis or the emphasis on the idea of a Chinese path of modernization? And basically, he expounded on it, saying the Chinese modernization is a modernization of a huge population, is common prosperity for all, is of material and cultural ethical advancement. And it's a modernization of harmony between humanity and nature, and it's also a modernization of peaceful development. What do you think of these?
Yeah, yes, I agree with you, Liu-Xin. I think it's a natural part of China's political discourse at the highest levels that it is conceptual and abstract. But one of the features of that system is that as things cascade down to the lower levels through provinces and cities and townships and down to communities, then it starts to be about people actually doing things. And I think the modernization in concrete form, it covers technology, it covers innovation. Innovation has always been a very, very important part of Xi Jinping's philosophy.
Right.
Covers industrial upgrading, but it also covers very, very important issues like the environment. And again, coming back to the idea of whole process, people's democracy. Possibly the most fundamental element of it from my perspective is people-centered development. Now, all of the things that I've just mentioned, all of these factors are part of modernization, but the fundamental element is people-centered. It has to be based on making sure that people's lives get better. And I think that is going to be fundamentally the goal in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years.
Do you see? Do you see the Chinese version, the Chinese path of modernization, drastically different from a Western path of modernization, David?
Whether it's dramatically different, I'm not sure. There are elements that are fundamentally different. If you look back on the West's modernization from a historical perspective, it happened in a very different political environment. And I suppose the biggest difference is that Western modernization was built on exploitation. It was built on the exploitation of their own working classes, and it was also built on the exploitation of other countries and other peoples. And if you're looking for a fundamental difference between China's modernization cannot happen. It cannot follow that Western path. So China has to find a new path. And as you yourself said, it's about peaceful development. But essentially it's people-centered, and that means not just the people of China, but other peoples in other countries. China's trying to reach out through the Belt and Road. It's trying to reach out through its work in Africa. It's trying to reach out to other peoples.
Yeah.
And it's trying to reach out to the West as well. But you can only reach out to people who are willing to work with you.
then there is the very interesting, nuanced changes in the translation, in the terminology of some of the things that have always been said. For instance, we hear, for me, this was the first time, the saying of human community with a shared future. David, you are an expert in editing the English translation of Chinese documents, particularly contemporary Chinese political documents. How do you look at this apparent change from a community with a shared future for mankind to right now simply a human community with a shared future? What does that say to you?
Well, there are some very interesting nuances there. I think the phraseology is human community of shared future or global community of shared future. And I think the important difference in terms of the past is if you talk about building a community with a shared future for mankind, I think mankind's an unfortunate word in English, which it's not really reflected in the Chinese. Nowadays, if you're talking about mankind in English, it sounds like you're excluding half of the population who aren't men. So I think it's a positive step to be looking at a different formulation. If you talk about building a community with a shared future, it does rather sound as if you're doing two different things. We're going to build a community and we're going to give it a shared future. And one of the things that President Xi increasingly emphasizes is that we all have a shared future, whether we like it or not. And building a human community of shared future or building a global community of shared future, I think emphasizes better the idea that we're doing one thing. We're doing one thing, we're not doing two distinct things. We're building a global community of shared future. We have the shared future, we need to build the global community to reflect that.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I think it does sound short. It is shorter, definitely. But Professor Xia
it sounds neater in English, Leosine. It sounds neater.
Sounds neater.
I like it better.
Yeah, I like it better too. Professor Xia, what does this all mean for the ordinary gals and pals who are watching us in front of television in a city in Brazil, for instance, or in South Africa, or in Montenegro? What does all of that mean? How are they going to be impacted by these ideas and abstract things?
Yes, this community or the human community actually to build a shared future for the human community is promoted and initiated by China. But there should be, it shouldn't be the only task about the Chinese people or Chinese government or China. It should be the entire human species or the Homo sapien, the entire species task, not only a task for the next the decades or 2 decades or 3 decades, but actually it is a task for the entire generation or next generation. So if I were kind of the foreigners, or if I were kind of citizens of other country and listening to President Xi's speeches in terms of this, I would think that okay, this leader is not considering his own country. This leader is considering the entire kind of the Earth, the entire planet. All of us should be considered into this. Should be considered into the building of the shared future of a human community. So let's say we have a sense of belonging. Let's say we have a sense of being considered in terms of the greater task. So China is making more contribution of the global community, the international community, rather than focusing more on the single country's development or modernization.
China at least wants to make contribution to the global community, provide more public good. Let's take a listen right now to a conversation I had with the former Prime Minister of Greece, Mr. George Papandreou, just a couple of days ago, when I asked him what is he expecting from the upcoming 20th National Congress of the CPC. Let's take a listen.
Whoever in the world looks at China, whether they are friendly or not, has to recognize that over the past decades, China has been able to accomplish a major feat, which is historical in size, and that is to bring so many hundreds of millions of people out of dire poverty into and moving towards what we would call sort of a middle class or a moderately moderately
Well-off society?
well-off society. Yes, yes, yes. That is a huge achievement, and that has to be recognized from friend and foe. And so obviously there is a new stage, and everybody will be and has been watching the conclusions of the Party Congress, the National Congress, and as Xi Jinping has said, he has mentioned the need for renewal in the party. I think that renewal comes when you are open to the world of best practices, where this is, I think, China has truly been able to profit and benefit from globalization, from the globalized society.
That was my conversation with former Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou. Professor Xia, concerning what Mr. Papandreou mentioned about renewal of the party by adopting best practices from around the world to further to consolidate, to improve itself, to develop China, do you also see that there is a determination and open-mindedness that's reflected in the report delivered by President Xi for China to continue to open up, to adopt what's best from other cultures, other political systems, and to keep China, constantly renewed?
Yes, and the major report actually has highlighted the importance or the significance of opening up in terms of the further development of not only the further development of China, but also the further development of the world economy, the international kind of development. Because when we look back to the beginning of China's reform and opening up, almost more than 4 decades ago, in 1978, in 1979, actually China started with opening up. Okay, China started its reform and the domestic policy and the international policy, foreign policy, economic policy by opening up. So China opened the door to the outside world, welcoming the international resources, welcoming the international capital, welcoming the modern techniques for the help or for assistance of China to go through different stages of, let's say, the transformation or the change of the old regulations and other kinds of. So China is, well, we can argue that China has made a lot of achievement or fruit by doing the opening up. So opening up is the deep code, or it's the kind of the secret, let's say, weapon of China's development and success. So in the future, China, well, should continue, and China should continue open up, and should open up in different, let's say, framework, deep, or we can say deeper opening up and more comprehensive opening up. This has been mentioned and emphasized in President Xi Jinping's speech in 2018. In celebrating the 4 decades, or in celebrating the 40 years of the China's reform by the end of 2018. So if we remember right, and he actually in that speech mentioned a lot about this thing. Okay. And also, actually after 2.5 years, and his first foreign visit and his first kind of visit in this year or since the pandemic actually is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? When he was in Shanghai Cooperation Organization in September, he also mentioned the significance of opening up, not only for China, but also for some kind of region and for the entire globe.
Yeah, David, let me ask you this. Somehow there is the worry that China is not doing that anymore, that China is more inward-looking, partly because of the restrictions imposed after COVID-19 broke out. But somehow there is this worry in the other part of the world. You have lived in China all these years. What is your feel of the trend? And if you look at some of the languages, some of the policies, it does emphasize confidence as well as self-reliance. Is that a contradiction with the opening up spirit that is being promoted as well?
No, I don't think it is at all, Yosine. I think we have to bear in mind the West is not the whole world. Very clear at the moment that certain Western countries, particularly the USA, basically led by the USA, are now quite openly trying to suppress China's rise. but the West isn't the whole world. The fastest developing countries, the fastest developing regions now are outside of the West. I think China's current strategy is a realistic strategy. It recognizes the issues that exist with the West at the moment. And the fact of the matter is China as a country has enough critical mass to do it on its own. When the UK rose to become the world's preeminent power after the Industrial Revolution, I think it had a population of 10 million. When the USA took over that role in the 20th century, they had a population of 100 million. China has a population of 1.4 billion now. It has by far the largest populations of educated people, technologists, scientists and engineers. And I think that part, the focus on the domestic economy, is a recognition of certain external factors and also a statement of intent that China is big enough. If the whole Western world insists on cutting off its nose despite its face, they're going to do more damage to themselves than they are to China. But there is an insistence too on international engagement. China is not turning its back on the rest of the world. China continues to be open to those who are open to China.
Right.
And I can give you a simple, concrete example. I'm holding here in my hand an award that I was given recently for a competition in which I was a judge. It's called the Public Benefit International Challenge for Youth. Mm-hmm. And it's an annual competition supported by the China Africa Business Council, where teams of Chinese school kids create projects for Africa involving development, involving poverty alleviation. They work together with young Africans as mentors who are studying here in China or working in China, and they create projects that will benefit villages in Africa in terms of clean water, in terms of things like family planning. And the whole thing is conducted in English. Everything is conducted in English.
We have to know more, learn more about these projects and what's going on, or tell more of this to our audiences around the world. Finally, Professor Xia, very, very briefly, can you guess what is the most frequently mentioned word in the report delivered on Sunday? Did you have a calculation?
I haven't done the calculation. And
what is your guess?
My guess is the 伟大, the greatness, the 伟大.
Okay. And David, yours?
My guess would be Fajan. Sure.
Fajan. David, you got it. According to the oral version of the report, the word development ranked the highest. 98 times it was mentioned. Then it was socialism. Then it was people, 75 times. Then it was modernization, 50 times. Professor Xia, you need to catch up a little bit.
Yes.
Anyway.
Leontine, I know that because I carry out that analysis regularly myself in the documents I work with, and it's always Fajan.
Always Fajan. You see a lot of emphasis put by China on development. And this time President Xi mentioned specifically common development between China and other countries in the world, particularly developing countries. We have to leave it there. Time is really limited. Many thanks to my guests, Professor Xia Lu from Renmin University of China and David Ferguson, honorary Chief English Editor of Foreign Languages Press. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thanks for watching. You've got the point.